Imagine for a moment that deep within your being, there is a quiet, steady flame. It doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't beg to be noticed. And yet, it's always there, burning softly beneath the noise of the world, beneath the stories you tell yourself, beneath even your own name. That flame is your true self, your divine essence, the sacred point where the infinite meets the individual. As Emmet Fox once taught, this inner light is not something you must earn or build. It is something you must remember. It is already placed within you, planted like a seed of eternity inside the garden of time. What the world calls faith is simply the act of tending that flame, and like any flame, it can dim, flicker, or burn brightly depending on your care. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. Let us begin. You have walked through many winters, some cold on the outside, others colder on the inside. You've known what it means to feel alone even when surrounded, to feel empty even when busy. And yet through all of that, you're still here. You're listening. Something in you still wants more, not from the world but from yourself. That more is not ambition. It's not ego. It's not the hollow noise of wanting to be seen. That more is the sacred whisper of the flame calling you to return. Your faith is not an accessory. It's not just for Sundays or for moments of crisis. It is the very oil that keeps the engine of your life running in truth. But you don't pour that oil just once. You must refill it every single day. You must choose it, not just in prayer or meditation, but in your tone, your thoughts, your decisions, your inner commentary on yourself and others. The flame burns by way of your attention, and attention is everything. Where you place your attention is where you cast your vote for what you believe. If your gaze stays fixed on lack, on complaint, on the news, on the betrayals of yesterday, then the flame flickers. But when you turn within, even for a moment, even in traffic, even in grief, and remember that life itself flows through you right now, you stoke that sacred fire. You give it breath. You've likely heard people speak of keeping the faith as if it's some act of clinging. But faith is not something you grip like a rope in a storm. Faith is the flame that reminds you there's always light, even in the storm. And sometimes that light is not loud or victorious. Sometimes it's the quiet courage not to collapse, the strength to hold your tongue, the wisdom to wait one more day without slipping into cynicism. That is faith in motion. It doesn't matter what others see. It doesn't matter if they understand. Your flame is not for their comfort. It is your compass. You tend it not to impress, but to remember who you are. Because every time you forget, you start chasing substitutes, approval, attention, busyness, surface pleasures, false urgency, and none of it satisfies. None of it touches the place that aches to be known from within. The truth is, your soul doesn't want noise, it wants alignment. And alignment doesn't come from belief alone. It comes from practice, real, ordinary, often unimpressive spiritual practice, choosing to be kind when it costs you, refraining from gossip because you feel the harm it does to your own energy, redirecting your focus from what am I lacking to what is still true. That's how the flame stays alive. It doesn't need grand gestures. It doesn't need perfect theology. It needs oil, daily, silent, deliberate oil. And that oil is made from your choices, choice after choice, day after day, not in fear but in freedom, not in superstition but in spiritual logic, not to avoid punishment but to return to presence. Because when you forget your divine nature, you suffer unnecessarily. You react instead of respond. You spiral instead of stand. You fumble for answers when silence would have given you peace. But when you remember even faintly that you are not separate from the source, everything steadies. This flame is not borrowed from another. It is not passed down through bloodline or priesthood. It is yours. It is the original covenant between you and life. And every time you turn toward it, it turns toward you. Every time you choose integrity over approval, forgiveness over resentment, truth over convenience, you fan the flame. And the flame remembers. It does not need to be big to be real. It needs to be tended. So let this be the day you stop waiting for some ideal condition to feel worthy of spiritual clarity. You don't need to read one more book. You don't need to earn a diploma in divinity. You don't need to fix all your habits before you begin. You begin now as you are, with what you know, with the flame that already burns, because the moment you make that choice, you're not alone, you're not separate, you're not weak. You are in alignment with something vast and beautiful and exacting. You are walking not toward the light, but with it. And from this place, your faith doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be alive. Faith is not emotion. Let that truth settle deeply. Faith is not the rush you feel during a beautiful sunrise. It is not the swell of hope that follows a good piece of news. It is not the tingling you get when a teacher's words seem to pierce right through your confusion. Those are feelings, fleeting and sacred in their own right, but they are not faith. Faith in its pure form is a substance, a spiritual law, a creative force that responds not to your moods, but to your mental atmosphere. As Emmet Fox declared with unwavering clarity, faith is the key substance through which all manifestation flows. It is not tied to the weather of your emotions. It is anchored in the climate of your beliefs. This is why your faith doesn't have to feel good to be real. It doesn't have to look inspired. Sometimes it is just the quiet refusal to give up. It's the decision to take the next step, even while your heart is heavy. It's the moment you choose not to let your outer condition dictate your inner atmosphere. You have probably known moments where your mind was full of doubt, your body felt tired, your nerves were raw and still. Something in you got up. Something in you made the call, opened the book, prepared the meal, kept the promise. That something was faith in action, not flashy, not poetic, but absolutely alive. You see, if you measure your spiritual progress by how you feel, you'll constantly be misled. Feelings change with the wind. They are signals, not authorities. Your job is not to fight them or suppress them. Your job is to recognize them and continue anyway. When you understand that faith is substance, you stop worshiping emotions and start building on truth. Faith is substance because it occupies space in consciousness. It creates a channel, a structure, through which divine intelligence can flow into form. You don't have faith like someone has a possession. You become faithful by alignment. You mold the invisible into the visible by staying mentally congruent with what you know to be spiritually true even when nothing in your outer world seems to confirm it. This means when you say, "All is working together for my highest good," you don't say it to comfort yourself like a bedtime story. You say it because it is a law. It is a fact of the inner world that becomes the outer experience when practiced consistently. That consistency is the rub, isn't it? Because the world is full of options to feed on doubt. Screens filled with fear, conversations soaked in cynicism, traditions dressed up as truth but built on guilt. And yet, here you are, listening, remembering, choosing to keep the oil flowing. Faith requires maintenance, not because it is weak, but because the mind is forgetful, and the world is persuasive. Left untended, your thinking will start to align not with the eternal, but with the urgent, not with principle, but with pressure. And slowly, subtly, you'll find yourself operating from anxiety instead of alignment. But when faith becomes your foundation, everything changes. You begin to observe circumstances rather than obey them. You feel your emotions without becoming enslaved by them. You stop pleading for signs and start walking in the direction of what you spiritually know. That's the real miracle, not that your life becomes problem-free, but that your center becomes unshakable. Faith is also precise. It is not vague, wishful hoping. It is not the blurry comfort of maybe things will work out. It is the clear, unwavering claim that life is for you, not against you, that the same power that flung the stars into orbit now breathes through your lungs, sees through your eyes, walks your path with you, not above you, not outside of you, but within you. So you must learn to treat faith like a spiritual architecture. You don't build a house by imagining it once and then hoping it shows up. You measure, you reinforce, you revisit the foundation. You build layer by layer with care. That's what daily practice is for, not to impress the infinite, but to reinforce the structure of your consciousness, so that when the winds come, and they will, you don't collapse. You flex, you adjust, but you don't break. This is why spiritual teachers have always insisted on daily contact with truth. Not for ceremony, not to appear pious, but because truth is the material out of which faith is formed. Each truth you study, each line you reread, each moment of stillness you claim for yourself, it all adds substance to the inner flame. And the more substance your faith has, the more authority your thoughts carry. Because the universe responds not to what you wish for, but to what you embody. So stop trying to feel faithful. Start choosing alignment. Stop waiting for your emotions to catch up. Begin now, from where you are. Align your words, your tone, your focus, even just a few minutes at a time, with what you spiritually know to be true. That is the faith that moves mountains, not the loud kind, not the showy kind, but the kind that holds steady, that stays focused, that returns every day, even when it doesn't feel magical, especially when it doesn't feel magical, because that's when it's most alive. Fear is subtle. It rarely comes wearing its true name. Most of the time, it dresses itself in logic, in practicality, in the soft disguise of concern. It whispers, "Be careful," when you were meant to step forward. It says, "Wait until you're ready," when your readiness lives in your movement. Fear doesn't often scream, it erodes. Slowly, silently, it pulls your energy away from the flame and toward shadows. And that's how the flame begins to starve. Faith and fear cannot occupy the same space, not because one must conquer the other in a battle, but because they are built from different roots. Faith flows from the recognition of oneness. Fear grows from the illusion of separation. Faith says, "I am connected to the infinite." Fear says, "I'm on my own." And that single shift from connection to isolation is enough to cool the fire inside. You may not even notice it happening. It can look like hesitation. It can sound like, "I don't want to get my hopes up." It can feel like emotional fatigue, but at its core, it's always the same, a shrinking away from your spiritual identity and a false alliance with powerlessness. Fear feeds on forgetfulness, and the more you forget who you really are, the more the flame dims, not from judgment, but from neglect. Emmet Fox said, "You must not under any pretense allow your mind to dwell on any thought that is not positive, constructive, optimistic, kind. Not because you're supposed to fake positivity, but because every thought is food. It either feeds your flame or siphons its strength. And fear? Fear is hungry. It's not satisfied with a single thought. It looks for more. It multiplies itself through repetition. You think one anxious thought, and it brings 5 more. You imagine a worst-case scenario, and fear paints the walls of your mind with it. Not because fear is powerful, but because you give it permission. But you can revoke that permission. You can say, "No, this thought has no place in me." You can redirect not with force, not with panic, but with authority. Because fear only has as much power as you assign to it. It feeds on your attention. It lives in your speculation. The moment you stop giving it energy, it starts to weaken. That doesn't mean you'll never feel fear again. You will. But feeling fear is not the same as obeying it. You can feel the tremble and still move forward. You can hear the doubt and still speak your truth. You can notice the story and choose not to believe it. The oil that fuels your flame is not made from denial. It's made from truth. And the truth is, fear has no creative power. None. It cannot build. It cannot heal. It cannot generate life. It can only freeze what was meant to flow. It can only delay what was meant to unfold. It is not an enemy to be feared. It is a signal to return. A call back to center. A reminder to realign. Think of fear like fog. It makes everything look vague, uncertain, and distorted. but the road hasn't changed. The terrain hasn't shifted. Only your perception is clouded. The way through is not to stop and wait for the sun. It is to move forward carefully, deliberately, remembering that clarity returns with motion. The more you practice turning away from fear, not with defiance, but with awareness, the more automatic it becomes. You begin to catch it earlier. You notice its voice, its tone, its familiar rhythm, and instead of engaging, you breathe. You remember. You re-anchor. You return to truth. And that return doesn't have to be dramatic. It might be a sentence, "God is here." It might be a phrase from your practice, "This too is passing." It might be a silent smile, a moment of gratitude, a single choice not to spiral. That's all it takes to feed the flame again, because the flame doesn't need a bonfire to stay alive. It just needs daily oil, your daily choice to believe in the goodness of the infinite more than the noise of the temporary. Here's the powerful paradox. The more you feed your faith, the less fear even shows up, not because you become blind, but because you become stable. And when your inner world is stable, the outer world stops feeling so overwhelming. You're not shaken by every shift. You're not pulled by every headline. You see it, you acknowledge it, and you stay anchored. That's what spiritual maturity looks like, not the absence of fear, but the authority over it. You don't need to outrun it. You just need to stop feeding it. You don't need to shout affirmations over your trembling. You just need to sit in truth long enough for the trembling to subside. Because truth, unlike fear, doesn't rush. It doesn't push. It doesn't demand. It simply waits for your return. And when you return, the flame grows stronger. You feel it more than emotion, deeper than thought. A rising steadiness in your chest. A quiet knowing that you are not lost, not behind, not broken. You are being called, not punished, called, back to the fire. Back to your source, back to the place inside that already knows. So the next time fear comes, don't panic, don't perform, don't pretend. Just pause, remember, and choose again. Because every choice to feed your faith over your fear strengthens the flame, and the stronger the flame, the easier the return. This is how you keep your faith alive, not by force, but by fuel. Faith is not performance. It was never meant to be a show. It's not about how eloquently you speak your affirmations, how many books sit on your shelf, or how many hours you can sit in stillness with your eyes closed. All those things can be beautiful, but they are not the source. Faith is practice, quiet, personal, repetitive, humble. It grows in the ordinary. You may look at others and think, they seem so spiritually advanced, they speak so clearly, they glow with certainty. But what you don't see are the years of small daily choices behind that glow. What you don't see is the quiet discipline it takes to return to truth when no one is watching, when there is no applause, no spiritual audience, no outer reward. This is the power of practice over performance. The soul doesn't need stage lights. It needs space. It needs honesty. It needs consistency. You don't strengthen your inner life by appearing spiritual. You strengthen it by aligning your thoughts when no one else is around. By correcting yourself mid-sentence when you notice judgment creeping into your voice. By catching yourself in the middle of worry and gently choosing a higher thought. That is sacred work. And most of it happens in silence. You must stop measuring your spiritual life by how profound it feels. Inspiration is lovely, but it isn't transformation. Transformation happens through repetition, through the simple act of doing it again, choosing it again, thinking it again, holding yourself in alignment one breath longer than you did yesterday. This is why Emmet Fox so often emphasized simplicity. A single truth practiced faithfully is more powerful than 1,000 ideas left untouched. And that is why you must come back again and again to the basics. Not because you are weak, but because that's where strength is forged. Your life is a spiritual gymnasium. Every moment offers a chance to build muscle patience, trust, clarity, humility. And just like the physical body, The inner body doesn't grow by thinking about movement. It grows by motion, by actual, lived practice. And not just when you're inspired, but especially when you're not. Because that's the measure of real devotion. Not what you do when it feels easy, but what you do when it doesn't. You might wake up one day and feel nothing, no clarity, no joy, no sense of connection. That's okay. The sacred still waits for you in the next breath. So instead of analyzing the feeling, you move your feet. You begin your practice. You write the gratitude list. You open the book. You speak the truth. You do not wait for the inspiration to return, you invite it through movement. Practice is what builds the channel through which grace flows. And each time you return to that practice, no matter how unimpressive it feels, you deepen the groove in consciousness. You lay down tracks for spirit to move through you with greater ease. Performance looks for approval. Practice builds authority. And you are not here to be admired. You are here to be transformed. This doesn't mean you must always be perfect. Practice is not about perfection. It's about pattern. It's about creating new defaults in your thinking, so that when pressure hits, your instinct is alignment, not panic. So that when the door slams shut, your first thought isn't despair, but direction. You say, if this closed, something higher is opening. Not as wishful thinking, but as a practiced response. Faith works when it's worn in, not just spoken about. And here's the beautiful irony. The more you practice, the less you need to perform, because your presence begins to carry something real. You won't need to convince anyone of your peace, they'll feel it. You won't need to explain your growth, they'll see it in how you listen, how you speak, how you carry yourself when things go wrong. This is the glow that can't be faked, the fragrance of real practice, the result of steady alignment. And yes, sometimes your practice will feel dry, boring, uninspired. That doesn't mean it's not working. That means it's working exactly as it should. You're building muscle, not chasing mood. You're showing up to your own soul. And that's what keeps the flame alive, not what you feel, but what you repeat. You don't need a dramatic testimony to be spiritually powerful. You need spiritual rhythm, a way of being that centers you before the day begins, that recalibrates you when things fall apart, that reminds you of truth when the world goes silent. This is how faith becomes your default posture, not a reaction, but a presence. You keep showing up, you keep pouring the oil, and over time your inner flame burns steady, not because you forced it, but because you fed it. Let your life become the practice. Let every conversation be an offering. Let every decision be a reflection of your center. You don't need permission. You don't need validation. You just need to begin. One breath, one thought, one truth at a time. There is a world inside you that shapes the world around you. It's not visible to others, but it governs everything. Your tone, your reactions, your choices, your clarity. They all arise from this invisible field, your mental atmosphere. And make no mistake, your atmosphere is not accidental. It is made, moment by moment, by the quality of your thinking, by the frequency of your focus, by the stories you tell yourself when you're alone. It is shaped by what you allow yourself to dwell on, replay, and imagine. And this atmosphere is not just passive energy. It is a creative field. It's the soil in which your experiences take root. So if you want to keep your faith alive, you must become a guardian of your atmosphere. This doesn't mean policing every thought like a nervous sentinel. It means recognizing that your inner world sets the tone for everything you experience. Not because you control the external events of life, but because your perception of them determines your power within them. What Emmet Fox called mental atmosphere, others have called vibration, tone, or consciousness. Whatever the name, the principle is the same. Your dominant thought patterns generate a magnetic field. They either invite clarity or confusion, peace or pressure, alignment or anxiety. And the truth is, you can't fake your atmosphere. You might speak affirmations aloud, but if your inner atmosphere is soaked in resentment or complaint, the words fall flat. You might smile at someone, but if your thoughts are laced with judgment, they'll feel it. People don't respond to your performance. They respond to your vibration. Your dog senses it. Children pick up on it. Your own body reflects it. This is why spiritual practice must reach beyond surface ritual and into the depth of your inner tone. Ask yourself gently, not in guilt, but in truth. What am I radiating today? Am I moving from trust or tension? Am I assuming the worst or the best? Am I allowing my mind to spiral into stories I wouldn't say aloud? This is not about spiritual perfection. It's about spiritual hygiene. You clean your outer body daily. What about your mind? Cleaning the atmosphere doesn't mean never having a negative thought. It means not entertaining them as guests. It means noticing them without giving them lodging. It means saying, I see you, but I no longer serve that frequency. And then gently, firmly, redirecting your attention back to what's true, noble, possible, kind. Alignment is not rigid. It is agile. It adjusts. It returns. It flexes without snapping. And your power lies not in maintaining a perfect atmosphere at all times, but in recognizing when it's off and returning with grace. When you start your day in alignment, your atmosphere becomes an anchor. Life might still swirl around you, but you're not tossed in the same way. You respond rather than react. You pause before you speak. You listen deeper. You trust sooner. And that steadiness isn't about personality, it's about atmosphere. So how do you create this atmosphere? Not through wishful thinking, but through consistent, conscious attention. The first moments of your day matter. Before the phone, before the world rushes in, start with the stillness. Even 1 minute of truth can recalibrate your atmosphere for hours. Read something that lifts you. Sit in silence and acknowledge the infinite. Speak one line of clarity, not to perform, but to plant. Something like, today I align with peace. I walk in harmony with life. I radiate strength without struggle. Say it like you mean it. Let it settle. Let it shape the air around you. Throughout the day, check back in, not obsessively, but as a rhythm. Where is my focus right now? Is this thought making me heavier or lighter? Is my inner tone helping or harming my peace? These are not spiritual burdens. They're acts of self-care at the highest level, because your mental atmosphere either feeds the flame or fogs the glass. You've felt it before. You walk into a space and the energy feels dense, nothing's been said, but you can feel the atmosphere. That's not superstition. That's perception. And just as you can sense it in others, they sense it in you. But more importantly, you live in it. Constantly. So what kind of atmosphere are you building for yourself? One soaked in fear and control, or one steeped in presence and trust? One that contracts with every challenge, or one that expands into them with clarity? One that needs external validation to feel good, or one that radiates peace because it knows its source? You don't need to wait for perfect conditions to begin. You begin now exactly where you are, with the thoughts you choose to entertain, the emotional posture you hold, the words you allow to linger. And as your atmosphere shifts, your experience does too. People start responding differently, not because they've changed, but because you have. Opportunities begin to show up not because they weren't there before, but because now you can see them. And most importantly, your inner flame burns steadier. Because you're no longer breathing in the smoke of confusion, you're cultivating air that supports the fire. This is the work. Invisible, but real. Quiet, but powerful. And it doesn't take long. It just takes consistency. So don't wait for the world to calm down. Don't wait for your situation to shift. Begin to craft the invisible conditions of your life. That's where the oil is. That's where the flame finds fuel. In your atmosphere. There is a reason oil was sacred in every ancient tradition. It was more than fuel. It was preparation, anointing, consecration. It signified readiness. And in the inner world, that oil is spiritual practice, your daily renewal, your inner alignment, your return to truth before the fire dims. You don't run a lamp once and expect it to burn forever. You refill it. You clean the wick. You tend to it with care. So why do we so often treat our inner flame as though it will maintain itself? You must pour the oil daily. This is not because the infinite demands ritual. It's because your mind needs rhythm. Your soul needs space. Your spirit needs the nourishment of attention. And without it, you begin to lean on memory instead of presence. You begin to live on yesterday's clarity, yesterday's insight, yesterday's peace. But yesterday's oil cannot feed today's flame. This is the spiritual fatigue so many people feel and mislabel. They think they've lost their connection, or that something has gone wrong. But in truth, they've just stopped replenishing. They've replaced devotion with distraction. Instead of daily stillness, they've filled every spare moment with noise scrolling, reacting, consuming, performing. And so the flame flickers, not because it's weak, but because it's waiting. The invisible oil is made of the moments you give to truth, not just on retreat, not just on special days, but in the middle of the ordinary. 5 minutes of undivided attention to your soul is more powerful than an hour of distracted ceremony. When you sit, not to escape, but to remember, you begin to refuel. You don't force insight. You create space for it. You don't need complicated practices. You need consistent ones, a sacred sentence. A few conscious breaths, a return to stillness before your day floods in. This is how the lamp stays lit, not through effort, but through attention, not through pressure, but through presence. Emmet Fox emphasized that spiritual power is not accessed through drama. It is accessed through precision, through focus, through clarity. And that clarity is only found in silence deep, nourishing silence, not emptiness, but fullness without noise. Think of your daily practice not as a chore, but as a tuning. You are not performing for the divine. You are tuning yourself to it. Like a musician before a concert, you calibrate. You align. You make sure your strings aren't too tight with tension or too loose with passivity. You create the conditions for beauty to move through you. And once you are tuned, everything shifts. You begin to hear things differently. You speak with greater care. You don't rush to control the outcome. You carry your day like someone who knows they are guided, not someone hoping to be spared. That is the power of oil. It does not change your world instantly, but it changes how you walk through it. And that changes everything. This is why it's never about how long you practice. It's about how honestly. 1 minute of pure awareness, one sentence spoken from your spirit, can clear an entire fog of mental chaos. Because when the oil is present, the flame doesn't struggle, it shines. Let go of the idea that you need to feel ready. Let go of the pressure to practice perfectly. Begin where you are, with what you have. And pour the oil, even if it feels dry, especially when it feels dry. Because spiritual dryness is not failure, it is invitation, a signal from the soul that it is ready to be watered again. You may think, but I've drifted so far. It doesn't matter. The flame doesn't hold grudges. It waits. The moment you pour the oil, it remembers you. It rises. It glows. It warms the places in you that have gone cold. And the more you practice, the more you realize this is not just maintenance. It is life. It is joy. It is clarity. It is your return to source, again and again, not because you are lost, but because you are alive. There will be days when you don't feel like it. That's okay. Do it anyway. Let the act be the offering. Let the practice carry you until the feeling returns. Because this oil is not a reward, it's a requirement, not from fear but from design. You are made for this renewal. You are not meant to run dry. You are not meant to scrape by on yesterday's peace. You are not meant to live on fumes. You are meant to overflow, and that overflow comes from steady, sacred refilling. No guilt, no drama, just presence. So ask yourself, have I poured oil today? Not for performance, not for points, but for the simple, powerful act of tending my flame. Because when the flame is tended, you remember who you are. And when you remember who you are, the world cannot steal your peace. And that memory lived, not just believed, is the fire that cannot go out. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when inspiration starts to lose its flavor. The quotes that once lit up your heart feel hollow. The videos that stirred something deep now pass like noise. You scroll, search, save, collect, but nothing sticks. The well feels dry. And so you reach for more voices, more teachers, more content. It's subtle, this addiction to spiritual entertainment. You think you're growing, but you're only consuming. And the flame that once burned bright now sits beneath layers of static. This isn't failure. This is the wake-up. Because there is a difference between stimulation and transformation. Inspiration is fast. It hits hard and fades quick. Transformation is slow. It works like water through stone. You don't always feel it. It's not designed to entertain. It's designed to rebuild you from the inside out. But you must give it time. You must let the truth soak, not just touch the surface, but move into your thoughts, into your choices, into the exact way you speak to yourself in silence. When you collect wisdom but do not live it, you create a spiritual fog. And in that fog, the fire dims. Not because it has failed, but because it has been buried under so many borrowed voices that your own inner guidance can no longer be heard. You are not starving for truth. You are drowning in half-digested fragments. There is a moment when your soul rebels. It says no to more input. It closes its eyes to the bright lights. It quiets your hand as it reaches for another book, another clip, another teacher. And in that moment, you may feel strangely numb, disconnected, as though the very faith you once loved has died. This is the sink. It is what Emmet Fox called the death of false belief, the moment when your outer dependence must break for the inner flame to rise again. But it doesn't rise with a rush. It rises in silence. It rises when you sit still with no stimulus, no quote, no voice but your own breath. It rises when you close the browser, set down the device, and return to your practice not for a hit of motivation, but to remember how to be. And this memory hurts at first, because you see how far you drifted. You feel the weight of all that noise. You realize that you've been chasing the idea of spirituality instead of living it. But that pain is sacred. It breaks the spell. It clears the field. It makes space for something real to move again. This is where the flame begins to return, not through more information, but through integration. You remember the truth you already know. You return to the words that held you when nothing else could. Not because they're new, but because now you're finally ready to live them. That one sentence, so simple you almost overlooked it, becomes your compass. Not because it's flashy, but because it burns. It has weight. It rings clean. The real work begins when the inspiration ends. That's when faith is forged. That's when the flame starts feeding on substance, not show. That's when your practice becomes personal again, not curated, not performed, just yours. You stop asking, "What's the next teaching?" and begin asking, "What teaching have I ignored?" You stop chasing the high and begin building the habit. And slowly the static clears. Slowly the fog lifts. Not because something new appeared, but because the excess was stripped away. You realize you never needed more. You needed less noise, less novelty, less distraction dressed as discovery. And in the space where silence once felt like absence, you begin to feel something steady. It's not excitement, it's not emotional fire, it's presence. It's quiet, rooted, undeniable. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be spoken to be real. And now, when you return to those timeless truths, the ones you once skipped over in search of something deeper, you hear them for the first time. Because now you've stopped looking for new. Now you're ready for real. No one stands between you and the infinite. Not a teacher, not a ritual, not a lineage, not even your own past mistakes. This is the truth that both liberates and terrifies, because it strips away every excuse, every delay, every hiding place you've built to avoid stepping into your own authority. You have direct access, always have. The problem is, the mind doesn't trust that. It wants ceremony, validation, confirmation. It wants someone wiser to say, yes, now you're ready. It wants to be initiated by someone else's light before believing it carries its own. But Spirit waits for no ceremony. It speaks where there is stillness. It flows where there is surrender. It moves through those who move with it, not because of title or tradition, but because of alignment. You have already been initiated by pain, by longing, by the refusal to settle for shallow answers, and that's enough. There is something dangerous about over-relying on spiritual intermediaries. It begins so innocently. You listen to one voice, then another, and soon you believe your guidance can only come through others. You lose touch with your own signal. You begin to doubt what rises in you unless it's echoed outside you, and that doubt poisons the well. Because the more you search outside, the more you postpone the only real encounter there is, the one between your soul and the source. When you trust your own contact with Spirit, you stop seeking permission to believe what you already know. You no longer need signs. You no longer need someone else to frame it in perfect language. You simply return to the flame, to the quiet, to the knowing that doesn't come with lightning, but with a still, clean sense of yes. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it aches. Sometimes it just is clear as breath. And this inner authority doesn't make you proud. It humbles you, because you realize the responsibility it carries. When there's no one left to blame, no preacher, no book, no mentor, your practice becomes yours alone. And that is where the fire begins to burn for real. It's easier to rely on someone else's light. It's safer to follow someone else's formula. But formulas fail. People falter. Even sacred teachings must be reinterpreted by the truth that lives in you. Not to water them down, but to make them real. Lived, digested, practiced, not just memorized. Emmet Fox said, "There is no authority but the authority of the Spirit within you." And the moment you believe that, not in theory but in practice, you stop worshiping the path and start walking it. You begin to hear differently. The words you once copied now move through you with fresh meaning. The truths you once parroted now show up in your choices. You stop quoting and you start embodying. That's the shift. That's the break. And yes, it's terrifying, because there is no one left to blame for your misalignment. You can't say, "Well, my teacher didn't tell me," or "No one showed me how." You've been shown. The question now is whether you'll listen to the still voice that speaks when all others go quiet. Sometimes that voice will contradict the noise around you. It will guide you in ways logic can't explain. It will nudge you to speak when silence feels safer, to let go when control feels comforting, to rise when collapse would be easier. And it won't shout, it won't beg, it will wait, and then move the moment you do. That's the rhythm of real contact. It doesn't impose, it invites. It doesn't argue, it leads. And if you keep ignoring it long enough, you won't lose the voice, but you will lose your sensitivity to it. That's what most people call spiritual dryness. It's not the absence of spirit, it's the result of disuse. You haven't gone dark, you've gone numb. And numbness fades the flame not with wind, but with silence. The silence of neglect. You come back through action, through obedience to your own truth. Not rebellion, not reaction. Obedience not to a doctrine, but to the light within you that never left, even when you did. You will still learn from others. You will still be moved by great teachers. But you'll stop needing them to stand in for what already lives inside you. You will bless their words, but you will not need their permission. You will receive their insights, but you will not abandon your own wisdom in the process. And when that happens, something breaks open. You realize you were never trying to become spiritual. You were trying to become faithful to what was already spiritual in you. The flame didn't need to be lit. It needed to be trusted. It needed to be tended, not outsourced. And in that moment, when you truly accept your own direct line to the divine, you stop shrinking. You stop second-guessing. You stop waiting. You begin. You don't lose your flame all at once. It dies slowly, under the weight of tiny delays. I'll start tomorrow. I'll pray when I have more time. I'll meditate once things calm down. These whispers seem harmless. They speak with calm tones, rational words, and polished excuses. But they are lies, every single one of them. Not malicious lies, just subtle ones, quiet enough to lull you, just quiet enough to convince you that waiting is wisdom. It isn't. Procrastination is not a scheduling problem. It's a spiritual leak. It drains the power of your presence into the fantasy of someday. It tells you you're not quite ready yet, that you need to feel more inspired, more healed, more certain, but none of that is coming. There is no magical state in the future where your practice will feel perfect. The only moment where real spiritual life can begin is this one. When you postpone your return to truth, the air around your soul thickens. You begin to move through life like someone underwater, slower, heavier, dimmer. You can still function, still appear normal, still even speak about the spiritual path. But you feel disconnected. You start reaching for comfort instead of clarity. You trade presence for distraction, and you call it rest. But it's not rest. It's spiritual numbness. The flame is still there. It hasn't died. But it has been muffled by the smoke of delay. This is how the lie of later becomes your master. Not by command, but by suggestion. It never says, abandon your practice. It only says, not now. And you believe it because it sounds reasonable. But there is nothing reasonable about drifting further from the only thing that brings you back to life. The truth is, you already know the next right action. It's not hidden. You've known it for days, maybe weeks. That step, that sentence, that practice, that release. But because it doesn't thrill you, because it doesn't give you immediate reward, you postpone it. And in that delay, you surrender authority over your life not to God, not to fate, but to avoidance. And avoidance builds nothing. It only erodes. You can dress it up as discernment. You can call it pacing yourself. But you feel the truth beneath it. You feel the drain, the flicker, the dulling of your own light. You hear yourself saying things like, I just need to get through this week. And in that moment, your flame shrinks, not because of the circumstance, but because you've handed your agency to time. Time was never meant to lead you. Spirit was. And Spirit always speaks now. This is what Neville Goddard meant when he said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. He wasn't talking about future dreaming. He was talking about embodiment now, not when things shift, not when you feel better. Now, because the infinite only moves in the present. Delay is the invention of the small self, the fearful self, the self that still believes the divine needs better conditions to work through you. It doesn't. So what do you do when you feel stuck in the loop of postponement? You break it with one move, any move, not a grand gesture, just one true step. Open the book, close the door, take the walk, speak the phrase, refuse the spiral. Whatever real action your soul already knows, it's waiting. It's been waiting. And when you take it, the fog begins to lift. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for the breath to return, enough for the flame to flicker back into warmth. You don't wait to feel ready. Readiness comes from movement. You don't wait for clarity. Clarity is born in obedience to truth. And you don't need to understand the full path before taking the first step. The map unfolds as you walk. But nothing unfolds until you begin. You don't grow through thinking. You grow through engagement, through contact, through action taken with trembling hands. This is what keep your faith alive means. Not feel it, but keep it. Through practice, through refusal to delay, through your willingness to walk forward even while doubt whispers, because doubt will always whisper. That's not the problem. The problem is when you sit down and wait for it to be silent before moving. It never will be. You move anyway. Every time you postpone your practice, you affirm the lie that your spiritual life is negotiable, that the fire can wait, that something else is more urgent. But there is no urgency greater than this, to live aligned with the truth of who you are now, not later. And if you've waited too long, if you feel dry and distant, if your soul feels asleep, then today is your resurrection, not through willpower, through return, not through grand declarations, through one faithful move. Because this moment right now, not tomorrow, not once you finish everything else, this moment is holy. It is the only place your flame can burn. It is the only place Spirit meets you. And it is always enough. There are moments when life rips the floor out from under you. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a loss that leaves no words behind. And in those moments, faith doesn't feel like a warm light. It feels like silence, like being dropped into the middle of a vast night sky without a map. You pray, but your voice echoes back. You look for meaning, and all you find is rawness. This is the breaking point. It is also the consecration. Most people mistake these thresholds as failure. They think their flame has died, that their spiritual practice didn't work, that maybe they were never truly connected at all. But in truth, this is where the practice becomes real. This is where the oil you poured day by day, word by word, shows its value. Because now you are not coasting on emotion. You are not moved by inspiration. You are standing with your back against the wall of circumstance, and still you choose to remember. Still, you speak a line of truth, not because you feel it, but because it is the only thread you have left. This is not punishment. It is purification. You are being asked in the most direct way what you actually believe, not what you tell others, not what you post, what you hold in the silence. When nothing works, when nothing comforts, when your body trembles and your breath is shallow, what truth still lives in you? This is the fire that burns off every false comfort. This is the furnace Neville Goddard spoke of when he said your assumptions must be tested, not by external proofs, but by whether you cling to them when there is no evidence to support them. Faith that survives crisis is not born in crisis. It is revealed by it. If you have been tending your flame not performing, but practicing, then what you've built is resilience, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that keeps breathing when everything in you wants to run. The kind that says, even now, especially now, I return. You don't need to pretend you're okay. The spiritual path is not about emotional denial. It's not about wrapping grief in pretty words. You feel everything, fully, honestly. But underneath the ache, there is a deeper knowing, a bedrock that does not shake. And if you've lost that feeling, don't panic. The presence hasn't gone. Only your awareness has dimmed. You are in the thick smoke of transformation, where the mind goes quiet and the soul rearranges itself beneath the surface. Do not try to fix this moment. Do not try to rush through it. Let it do what it came to do. Let it clean your attachments. Let it strip what cannot last. Let it take what you've outgrown, even if you clung to it for comfort. This is sacred fire. It doesn't destroy it, refines. Some of the most potent spiritual growth will feel like dying, because something is dying. The identity you thought you needed, the image you tried to protect, the narrative that once gave you safety. And as that collapses, the space left behind can feel unbearable, empty, cold, pointless. But this is the preparation for the deeper birth. What rises from here is not the same as before. It's not just a more positive version of your old self. It's a new center, one that doesn't depend on things working out, on people behaving, on circumstances aligning, one that burns from the inside, quiet, steady, impossible to manipulate. And when it rises, it will not announce itself with fireworks. It will enter like a whisper, as if it's been there all along, because it has. Faith was never meant to spare you from pain. It was meant to carry you through it. The breaking does not mean you are broken. It means the outer shell of your belief system has cracked, and now the real life inside can breathe. You may cry. You may scream. You may lie awake wondering if anything you believed was ever true. And still, somewhere in that mess, something holds, something stays, something glows. That is the flame, fed not by perfect moods but by loyalty, not loyalty to outcomes, but to essence. This is why the oil matters, not just for the good days, but for this. For the nights that stretch long and silent, for the seasons when your hands are empty, and your heart is sore, and your future looks like fog. This is when the oil reveals its power, and when the flame begins to rise again, and it will not be the same. It will not burn for applause. It will not dance for comfort. It will burn because it knows who it is. It will burn because it cannot do otherwise. It will burn because you have become the lamp, and the fire has found its home in you. You are no longer a seeker. You are now the altar. There's a kind of heaviness that settles in the soul, not from grief or loss, but from resentment. It creeps in quietly, one offense at a time. A betrayal here, a disappointment there, the slow drip of unmet expectations. At first, it feels justified. You replay the scene, the words, the tone. You tighten around it like a knot. You name it fairness. You call it self-respect. But slowly, invisibly, it begins to thicken the air around your flame. This is what unforgiveness does. It doesn't just hurt, it hardens. You don't notice it at first. You think you're managing. You still pray. You still practice. But the light is dimmer. The oil doesn't flow the same. You feel sluggish, even when you're doing all the right things. The words don't land. The clarity blurs. And deep down, you know something's off. That something is the blockage. Because holding resentment is like clenching your fist and trying to catch rain. The water touches you, but it doesn't stay. It runs off. No matter how sincere your practice is, the flame cannot fully breathe through a heart that refuses to release. This isn't about being nice. It's not about ignoring wounds. It's not about saying what happened didn't matter. It's about spiritual hydraulics, the flow of life. When you hold on to bitterness, you constrict your own field. You close the channels. And then you ask, why do I feel stuck? You're not stuck. You're stopped. And forgiveness is the release valve. It is not something you feel, it's something you choose. You don't wait for the anger to fade. You don't wait for them to apologize. You don't wait for understanding. Forgiveness isn't a reward for resolution. It's the way you reclaim your flow. It's the sacred decision to say, I will not poison my own well for the sake of proving how wrong you were. Because they may have been wrong, deeply wrong. But the deeper question is, how long will you carry what they left behind? This is the quiet violence of resentment. It turns you into the keeper of a flame you didn't start. You rehearse their actions until they become your own atmosphere. You wear their mistakes like armor, and with every step, you leak the oil meant for your flame. Forgiveness is not weakness, it's surgery. It cuts out the infection. It takes you down into the wound, not to dwell, but to clean. It's not soft, it's sacred, and it will likely hurt. Because when you really forgive, something dies. The identity built around the pain, the self that formed in opposition to what happened, the sense of moral high ground, the illusion that if you just keep hurting long enough, it will make it right. Nothing you've suffered becomes holy through holding on to it. It becomes holy through your choice to alchemize it. This doesn't mean you excuse. It doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop making your healing dependent on someone else's remorse. It means you pour the oil anyway. You tend the flame not because they deserve it, but because you do. You may need to forgive 1,000 times. That's okay. Each time it gets lighter. Each time the flame grows stronger. Each time the breath returns. And perhaps the one who most needs your forgiveness isn't someone else at all. Perhaps it's you, the version of you that stayed too long, that spoke too harshly, that ignored the signal, that repeated the pattern. You've judged that version mercilessly. Maybe you've buried them in silence, hoping time would cover the shame. But time doesn't heal what you've refused to love. Forgiveness brings it all into the light, the messy, human, hurting pieces. Not to shame them, but to gather them, to say, even now, you belong. To release the inner war and call your own soul home. When you do that, when you let go, for real, it's not a moment of celebration. It's quiet. Still. Sometimes it feels like nothing at all. But then the air shifts. The flame steadies, your body softens, and you realize how much energy you were spending to keep the grudge alive. It doesn't mean the wound didn't happen. It means you've stopped making it your home. This is what clears the flame. This is what opens the flow again. Not a perfect practice, not spiritual achievement, just a heart surrendered enough to stop clenching around the past. Forgiveness is the oil that doesn't show up in journals. It's not glamorous. It's not Instagram-worthy. But it is essential. It's the silent act that makes all the other acts real. Because you cannot carry light and keep feeding the darkness. Choose now. Not because you're ready, but because the flame is waiting. There's a misconception, often quietly held, that to be spiritual is to shun prosperity, that wealth is a trap, that money is inherently unclean, or that seeking abundance somehow betrays the soul. But if you've walked this path long enough, if you've stripped the illusions, sat through the fire, poured the oil, and kept the flame alive, then you've come to understand. Prosperity is not a luxury. It is a spiritual law. It is not something you chase. It is something you allow. Emmet Fox once wrote that supply is not about possession. It is about flow. When you are aligned, clear, faithful, honest, your needs are met, not because you've begged the universe, but because you've stopped blocking what is already yours. This is hard to grasp when you're in lack, when the bills are due, when the fridge is near empty, when the body is tense with worry. You think, I need a miracle. But the real miracle is not in the money, it's in the shift. The moment you remember that life is not random, that the same intelligence which beats your heart knows how to sustain you. Prosperity is not magic, it is response. The world you experience responds to the state of consciousness you maintain, not what you pretend, but what you actually hold. If your atmosphere is soaked in fear, even a financial gift will feel like a delay, not a solution. You'll worry it won't last. You'll shrink your joy before it can expand. But if your atmosphere is aligned with trust, even a small beginning becomes a seed. Wealth, then, is not about the numbers. It is about capacity. Capacity to receive without guilt, to hold without hoarding, to give without fear, to welcome increase without shame. And you build that capacity the same way you tend the flame daily, humbly, by clearing the internal blocks that say, I'm not worthy, this is too much, something bad will happen if I have more. Those are not facts. They are residues handed down, spoken over you, reinforced by broken systems. But truth is not bound by systems. It answers only to itself. And the truth is, the infinite does not ration. There is no shortage in spirit. There is no scarcity in the source. The supply is ever present, ever flowing, always seeking channels. And you, when aligned, are that channel. Not because you've earned it, but because that's how the law works. Water doesn't ask if the pipe is deserving. It simply flows where there's no blockage. So where are you blocked? Maybe you're still trying to prove your worth through struggle. Maybe you've equated survival with righteousness. Maybe you've judged others for their wealth and secretly closed the door on your own. Maybe you still believe suffering is more noble than thriving. But nothing about poverty purifies the soul, just as nothing about money corrupts it. It is the consciousness behind it that matters. If your flame is lit, if you are rooted in truth, integrity, purpose, then wealth in your hands becomes a multiplier of good. It expands your reach. It feeds your freedom. It fuels your ability to serve without exhaustion. But if the flame is out, no amount of income will fill the void. You will only magnify the chaos. This is why prosperity follows practice, not the other way around. When your faith is alive, prosperity finds you, because you no longer resist it. You no longer fear your own capacity. You no longer wait to deserve good you live as someone already aligned with it. And that changes the field. You stop bargaining with the universe. You stop praying like a beggar. You begin to move through the day with quiet confidence, not forced positivity, but deep calm. You take aligned action, not hustle. You receive without apology. You give without depletion. And most of all, you stop asking, when will it come? And start living as though it already has. Because in consciousness, it has. It may not yet be in your hand. But the moment you become the person who can hold it, it begins to appear not through force, but through unfolding. Not through chance, but through law. So no, you don't need to justify your desire for more. You don't need to explain why ease is better than struggle. You only need to ask, am I aligned enough to carry it without losing my flame? If the answer is yes, then let it come. If the answer is no, then return not to striving, but to clarity. Back to the oil, back to the practice, because the flame that is tended in truth will never attract what it cannot handle. And when prosperity does arrive, whether in opportunity, in money, in rest, in creative flow, let it bless you, let it stay. Let it teach you how generous life actually is when you stop shutting the door. There are seasons when the flame dims, not because you've done anything wrong, not because you've lost your way, but simply because you're passing through a valley that has no name. You wake up and the light feels far. You speak your truths and they land with no echo. You do the practices, but they feel dry. You sit in stillness, but the stillness feels like absence. This is when the flame flickers, not extinguished, just tired, pulled inward, silent in a way that startles you. And if you've never walked through this before, you might panic. You might assume the worst, that you've disconnected, that spirit has turned its face, that your faith has failed. But this is not death. This is gestation. The soul doesn't move in a straight line. It spirals. It deepens. And sometimes to deepen, it withdraws. It goes underground not to punish you, but to invite you into a different kind of listening, a quieter kind, one that doesn't chase the light, but waits for it, not passively, but faithfully. This is the discipline of dry seasons. Neville Goddard spoke often of the state of sleep, not physical sleep, but the kind of sleep where your conscious alignment fades and you begin to drift with the currents of outer experience. And it's in this drifting that the flame begins to dim. You go through motions, you remember the words. But the aliveness is missing. You feel off, but can't explain why. And that's exactly what makes this season so sacred. It pulls you deeper than explanation, deeper than feeling, deeper than performance. This is where all the surface layers burn away. What's left is bare presence, no inspiration, no clarity. Just the naked will to stay with your soul when nothing around you makes sense. And that's where the real flame is forged, not in the height of ecstasy, but in the dull morning when your body is heavy, your thoughts are stale, and you choose to show up anyway. You sit, you breathe, you speak one line of truth, even if it feels like a whisper into a void. Because something in you knows this is not the end. This is the turning. The mistake many make here is reaching for substitutes. They seek louder inspiration, a new method, a different teacher. But the flame does not need more. It needs space. It needs stillness. It needs your steady presence, not to stoke it, but to wait with it. Like a fire beneath ash, it's still burning, faintly, quietly, and your faith in its existence becomes the very thing that feeds it. This is not a time to be productive. It is a time to be faithful, to honor what is happening even if you don't understand it, especially if you don't understand it. The dry season is not a detour, it is part of the path. It teaches you what the vibrant seasons cannot, that the flame is not a feeling, it is a fact, that your connection is not based on your emotional state, that even in silence you are heard, even in stillness you are seen, even in numbness you are known. This is where your faith becomes clean, stripped of craving, stripped of needing a sign, stripped of needing the spiritual life to feel good all the time. And in that stripping, something new emerges. Not drama, not grandeur, just quiet clarity. You may not be able to name it, but one day something will shift. Not big, not loud. Maybe just a breath that feels lighter, a sentence that lands, a memory that brings warmth instead of sorrow. And you'll know The flame is turned. It never left. You just had to learn how to sit with it in the dark. There is strength in that silence, a depth that those who've only known light cannot carry. You will rise from this season with an authority that can't be faked, a calm that doesn't need to convince, a glow that doesn't burn for show but for guidance. And when someone else walks through their own dimming, you won't panic for them. You'll know how to sit, how to wait, how to remind them with your very presence that the flame still lives. Because once you've survived your own flicker, you no longer fear the dark. There is a turning point on this path where the flame within you begins to radiate, not in grand gestures, not in dramatic conversions, but in presence. You become the quiet room in a noisy house. You walk into a space and something changes. No halo, no announcement, just a felt sense of steadiness. And others feel it, even if they don't know what to call it. This is the light leading others, not through persuasion, not through preaching, through being. You no longer need to explain yourself. You don't try to fix anyone. You stop arguing for your perspective. Because something in you has settled. You've gone through the fire. You've sat in the dry seasons. You've poured the oil when no one saw you. And now the glow is real. And real light doesn't shout. It shines. This is not about being above others. It's about being with them while anchored in truth. You don't need to correct their path. You hold your own with such clarity that they begin to question theirs. Not through pressure, but presence. You may not even know the impact you're having. Someone watches how you respond in a moment of tension. They notice how you don't spiral when things fall apart. They see how your tone carries gentleness even when you're speaking hard truth. They notice that you aren't desperate for approval, yet you move with compassion. This is the evidence of a tended flame. And in those quiet moments, your presence does more than any argument ever could. It creates possibility. It reminds others what alignment feels like just by standing near you. There's a reason the ancient mystics spoke more about radiance than rhetoric. Because light doesn't convert, it reveals. It shows what was always there, but forgotten. And when someone is ready, that light is enough. But to carry it, you must be careful. Because it is easy, once your flame is strong, to start thinking you must now teach with it. To begin preaching instead of living. To shift the focus outward, again correcting, guiding, analyzing, fixing. That's not the call. That's the ego's reaction to being newly empowered. You are not here to convert. You are here to embody. You are not here to set others straight. You are here to stand so straight in your own center that they remember how to stand in theirs. Even when someone disagrees, even when they misunderstand you, even when they mock what you've become. You stay still, not passive but rooted, because the truth is, many won't be ready to receive what you carry. That's not your failure. That's their timing. And you must respect it. You don't pull someone toward the flame before they're ready. You don't pour oil where there's no vessel. But when someone is ready, when they're on the edge of their own breaking, when they're weary from the noise, when their flame is flickering and they don't even know where to look, that's when your life becomes a beacon. Not because you've planned it, but because you've lived it. And your life becomes the lesson. It becomes the quiet invitation. There's another way to live, and I'm walking it. No title required. No need to explain how much you've studied, how many books you've read, how many days you've been consistent. All of that disappears when someone feels truth in your presence. Not the kind of truth that demands agreement, the kind that frees. You'll know when someone is ready. They'll lean closer, not to flatter, but to remember. They'll ask different questions, not about facts, but about peace. And when they do, you don't give them answers. You don't try to transfer your flame. You simply remind them they already have one. You hand them the same mirror you once held for yourself, and you let them see. Really see. This is sacred leadership, not loud, not viral, but unshakable. And it begins the moment you stop needing to prove your light and start trusting that it shines on its own. You don't carry the flame to illuminate your identity. You carry it to warm others when they're ready to feel it. And even if they never are, you burn anyway. Because the flame is not a strategy, it's who you are. The flame stays alive because you stay with it, not in moments of passion, not just in crisis, but in the ordinary rhythm of every day. That's the final truth most never reach, not because it's hidden, but because it's not dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't come with signs and wonders. It's quiet, repetitive, consistent. It's the kind of faith that builds over time like breath builds lungs. You tend your spirit the way you tend your home, without spectacle, without applause. You wake, you align. You speak the truth, even when it's boring. You hold the tone, even when no one's listening. You clean the atmosphere, even when no one thanks you. Because now you understand. The flame isn't fueled by how you feel. It's fueled by how you live, daily. The ego wants something new, something bold, something transformative and immediate. But the soul doesn't need novelty. It needs nourishment. And that nourishment comes not from spiritual adrenaline, but from sacred discipline. You rise. You pour the oil. You speak the truth not for the world, but for yourself. You forgive not to feel better, but to release the blockage. You return not because you've fallen far, but because returning is the path. Over time, something shifts. You stop needing to be on fire to be faithful. You stop equating depth with intensity. You stop looking for that next emotional high and start rooting in steadiness. And in that steadiness, you find your strength. Your presence no longer spikes and crashes. It holds. You begin to move through life with a calm that isn't dull, but durable. You don't over-explain. You don't chase validation. You simply live aligned and let the results unfold as they will. Because now you know the outcome isn't your job, the tending is. You no longer ask, is my faith working? You ask, am I working my faith? Not to prove yourself, not to impress anyone, but because that alignment is freedom, and you've tasted what life feels like outside of it, scattered, reactive, searching. And now the cost of misalignment is too high. You'd rather return to silence than argue your point. You'd rather pause for 2 breaths than push through misaligned action. You'd rather keep your tone clean than win the moment. Because the flame is sacred, and everything either feeds it or dims it. You don't need to do everything right. You just need to stay in relationship. Keep checking in. Keep noticing. Keep choosing again. The flame is patient. It doesn't leave when you slip. It waits. It doesn't shame you. It calls you. And every time you answer, the relationship deepens. This is the quiet glory of faith kept alive. Not flashy, not performative. Just real, deep, lived. The ones who carry this kind of fire walk lightly, but leave impact. They speak simply, but their words land. They don't stand at the front of the room, but people turn toward them in a storm. Because you can trust what's been tested. You can lean on what's been lived. That's what your life becomes, a flame that steadies others just by continuing to burn. And this is how the flame stays alive. Not through hype, not through spectacle, but through sacred consistency. The kind that no one sees, the kind that doesn't ask to be praised, the kind that rises each day and says again, yes, I'm here, I remember. I choose to live lit. Let others chase the flash. You choose the flame. Let others wait for signs. You live as one. Let others start and stop. You continue, and in that continuation, you become more than faithful. You become fire. So now the journey rests. You've walked through the origin of your flame, through its flicker and its rising. You've met silence, met fire, met the hush of real presence. And through it all, you've stayed. You didn't run from the empty moments. You didn't give up in the dry seasons. You returned. That return is everything, because that's what faith is, not noise, not thrill, not drama. Just returning, again and again, tending without needing proof, choosing without needing reward, remembering not because it's easy, but because it's true. And now, you know the difference. You know how hype fades. You know how delay steals. You know what it means to carry light, not just chase it. And most of all, you know this truth. The flame doesn't stay alive by chance. It stays alive because you are loyal. So as your day ends, or your evening deepens, or your eyes close, let the flame settle. Let it rest in your chest like a quiet rhythm, not loud, not urgent, just there, faithful, familiar. You don't need to hold it tight. You just need to remember it's yours, always has been, always will be. And in the stillness, trust this. The work is working. The light is leading. And you are enough to carry it forward, not someday. Now,